He was a millionaire, but what he saw in the trash changed his life forever that morning. The cold didn't come only from the weather. It was the kind of cold that made the city rush, heads down, eyes forward. Cars moved slowly through the streets, stopping and going, as if everyone was late for something too important to look around. Inside a luxury car, Eduardo sat upright, his posture controlled, his expression calm. His phone rested in his hand, filled with messages, numbers, confirmations. Everything was working. Everything was under control. And yet, something inside him wasn't. He couldn't say exactly when it had started. Maybe after the last party, surrounded by smiles, when he felt completely alone. Maybe after another meeting where he won again and felt nothing. Or maybe it had always been there, a quiet emptiness he had learned to ignore. Eduardo didn't usually look out the window, but that day he did. And that's when he saw the boy, too thin for his age, clothes torn and dirty, hands shaking from cold and hunger. And then Eduardo noticed something else. The boy's left leg was gone. In its place, there was a crude, improvised structure. Bent metal, old cloth, worn tape, barely holding his body upright. It wasn't a real prosthetic. It was survival. The boy was digging through the trash, not out of curiosity, not for fun, for food. The bag tore open. The boy lost his balance and fell. A hard piece of bread rolled across the wet sidewalk. The boy reached for it desperately, pulled it back toward himself, and stared at it for a moment, as if it were something precious. And then he cried, not loudly, not to call attention. A quiet, restrained cry, the kind that comes from someone who learned too early that no one is coming. Eduardo felt his chest tighten, though he didn't yet understand why. The car stopped. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, waiting for instructions. Eduardo didn't say go. He didn't say anything at all. He opened the door. The cold hit his face like a warning. Turn back. But Eduardo stepped out anyway. Each step toward the boy felt like breaking an unspoken rule. This wasn't his world. He didn't walk these sidewalks. He didn't smell this air. He didn't kneel on dirty pavement. But there he was. The boy looked up, startled, and instinctively tried to hide the bread behind his body, as if being hungry were a crime. His voice trembled as he spoke. He said he wasn't stealing. He said he was just hungry. The words hung in the air. Eduardo didn't answer right away. His throat tightened. He knelt down, lowering himself to the boy's level. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy hesitated, as if names were something the world didn't always allow him to keep. "Lucas," he murmured. Eduardo repeated it slowly, as if memorizing it. Lucas, 10 years old, and already familiar with hunger, abandonment, and being unseen. Eduardo took off his coat and placed it over the boy's shoulders. Lucas tried to refuse, but the cold was stronger. Eduardo held out his hand. Lucas stared at it, suspicious. Then, slowly, he took it. And in that moment, Eduardo felt something he had never felt in any meeting, any deal, any negotiation. Lucas's hand was cold. Too cold, thin, tired. Eduardo guided him to the car. Lucas sat stiffly inside, afraid to touch anything. His eyes dotted around, as if waiting for someone to shout at him. Eduardo told the driver to take them to a simple restaurant, not a fancy place, not somewhere that would make the boy feel like a mistake. The restaurant was small and quiet, the kind of place people pass without noticing. To Lucas, it felt enormous. He stood still near the entrance, unsure of where to sit, his eyes scanning the room as if he might be asked to leave at any moment. Eduardo gestured gently toward a table in the corner, away from the windows, away from curious looks. Lucas sat down slowly. When the food arrived, he didn't rush. First, he stared at the plate. Then he leaned in slightly, smelling it, as if confirming it was real. Only then did he take a small bite. His body remained tense, shoulders raised, jaw tight. Each movement suggested caution, the kind learned by children who never know when something will be taken away. After a few seconds, he took another bite, then another. Soon, He was eating faster, though still carefully, pausing between mouthfuls to glance around the room. Eduardo noticed how Lucas ate, not like a hungry child, but like someone protecting something valuable. Eduardo didn't interrupt. He watched quietly, letting the boy finish at his own pace. When Lucas finally slowed down, Eduardo spoke softly. "When was the last time you ate?" Lucas frowned slightly, searching his memory. "Yesterday, I think," he said. "There was pizza in a bag. It was still okay." Eduardo looked away for a brief moment, not trusting his expression. Something sharp rose inside him. Not anger at Lucas, but at a world that allowed this to happen. "Where do you sleep?" Eduardo asked. Lucas hesitated, near the overpass. The answer was short, but heavy. Eduardo understood exactly what it meant. "And your parents?" he asked, carefully. Lucas didn't look up. "My mom died," he said. "I never knew my dad." There was no drama in his voice, no tears, just fact. Eduardo noticed the boy's leg again, the cloth, the worn tape, the way Lucas avoided putting weight on it. "What happened?" Eduardo asked. Lucas swallowed. "There was a truck," he said. "I was 7. At the hospital, they said I needed surgery. My mom didn't have the money." He paused. "Then she got sick. Then I was alone." The sentence ended there. Eduardo felt something shift inside him. He realized he wasn't sitting across from a hungry child. He was sitting across from someone the world had quietly abandoned. When they finished eating, Eduardo paid and stood up slowly, not wanting to rush the moment. Outside, the air was colder. Gray clouds pressed low over the city. Eduardo reached into his pocket and placed a small card on the table. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "Same place, same time?" Lucas didn't smile. He looked at the card as if it were fragile. "You don't have to lie," Lucas said. "You can just go." Eduardo didn't argue. He didn't promise big things. "I'll come back," he repeated calmly. Lucas watched him walk away without saying anything. That night, Eduardo lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of the boy hiding dirty bread behind his body wouldn't leave him. Neither would the quiet cry on the sidewalk, or the cold of Lucas's hand in his own. For the first time in years, Eduardo felt afraid, not of losing money, not of losing control, but of becoming the man who walks past and never looks back. The next morning, Eduardo arrived early at the restaurant. He sat at the same table and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Part of him told him this was how these stories usually ended. Then the door opened. Lucas stepped inside. He walked slowly, limping slightly, wearing the same clothes, the same cautious expression. He stopped when he saw Eduardo, clearly surprised. Eduardo didn't smile like a stranger. He smiled like someone who had decided to stay. And in that quiet moment, without either of them saying it out loud, something new began. Lucas sat down slowly at the restaurant table, as if he were still testing whether this moment was real. His eyes moved constantly from Eduardo's face to the table, then to the door, as if someone might appear at any second to tell him he didn't belong there. Eduardo noticed. He didn't comment. He didn't ask. He simply ordered more food. Lucas looked up, surprised. "I already ate," he said, almost apologetically. "I know," Eduardo replied. "But you can eat again?" Lucas hesitated. Then he took a few more bites. Slower this time. More carefully, as if he were trying to learn a new rhythm. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was cautious. The kind of silence that forms when neither person knows how far they're allowed to go. Eduardo broke it gently. "Do you go to school?" Lucas shrugged. "Sometimes I walk past it," he said. "I like hearing the kids laugh." He didn't say anything else. Eduardo didn't ask why he didn't go inside. He already knew. "Do you have any friends?" Eduardo asked. Lucas thought for too long. "Not really." Eduardo nodded. When they left the restaurant, the sky was heavy and gray. It wasn't raining yet, but the air felt thick, as if something were coming. Lucas instinctively pulled Eduardo's coat tighter around his body. Eduardo pointed toward the car. Lucas stopped. "Are you taking me somewhere?" he asked, tense. I just want to show you something. Eduardo said calmly. If you want to leave afterward, I'll bring you back. Lucas scanned the street, the people passing by, the familiar exits, then gigotin. During the drive, Lucas watched the city through the window, not with curiosity, but with the careful attention of someone memorizing routes, landmarks, escape paths. Eduardo noticed. He parked near a small, ordinary park. Nothing beautiful. Nothing special. Just a place where people sometimes sat to rest. Here, Eduardo said. Lucas frowned. Why? They got out of the car and sat on a bench away from the main path. When you were digging through the trash, Eduardo began carefully. Were you alone? Lucas gave a short, humorless smile. I'm always alone. How long has it been like that? Lucas shrugged again. Since my mom got sick. Before that, she tried. After, she couldn't. A group of children ran past them, laughing. Lucas followed them with his eyes until they disappeared. Have you ever thought about how things could be different? Eduardo asked. Lucas didn't look at him. Thinking hurts, he said. The answer was simple. Honest Eduardo realized then that Lucas didn't need speeches. He needed consistency. I don't know how to fix everything, Eduardo said. I don't even know where to start. Lucas finally looked at him. Nobody does. But I do know one thing, Eduardo continued. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see you. Lucas laughed softly, without joy. Everyone says that. I know, Eduardo replied, and I'm still saying it. The wind picked up, and Lucas shivered. Eduardo noticed something else then. The way Lucas avoided putting weight on his leg, the tension in his face when he shifted. Does it hurt? Eduardo asked. Lucas hesitated. A little. Eduardo didn't believe him. A lot, he asked. Lucas Saiji, all the time. Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment. Sitting there, on that ordinary park bench, he understood something clearly. Helping Lucas wouldn't be a simple, feel-good gesture. It would be a commitment. And real commitments required real choices. Tomorrow, Eduardo said, I want to take you to a hospital. Lucas froze. No. The word came out fast. I've been before, Lucas said defensively. They look at you, ask questions, then tell you to leave. I'll go with you. It won't help. I'll stay. Lucas let out a nervous laugh. You don't get it. They want papers, signatures, a legal guardian. Eduardo felt the weight of the word. Guardian, I can be there? He said. Before fully thinking it through, Lucas stared at him. You can't, maybe not officially, Eduardo admitted. Not yet, but I can be present. Lucas stood up slowly, wincing slightly. I didn't ask for this. I know, Eduardo replied, staying seated. I saw you. Lucas turned his back, tense, ready to leave. Are you going to leave me later? He asked, without turning around. The question wasn't an accusation. It was fear. Eduardo stood up. I don't know what later looks like, he said honestly. But I know what now looks like. Lucas turned slowly. And what's that? I'll come back tomorrow, Eduardo said. And the day after that? And every day you let me. Lucas stood still for a long moment. The wind tugged at the oversized coat. Okay, he said finally. But I'm not promising anything. Eduardo nodded. Neither am I. Eduardo drove Lucas back to the same place where he had found him. He didn't try to take him home. He didn't try to fix everything in one day. Before getting out of the car, Lucas asked quietly, Why did you stop? Eduardo thought for a moment. Because I realized I was moving through life without seeing anyone. Lucas didn't reply. He stepped out of the car and walked away, limping slightly, until he disappeared around the corner. Eduardo stayed parked for a while after that, not driving, not checking his phone, just sitting there, knowing deep down that there was no turning back now. The next morning, the sky was heavy with low clouds, as if the day itself were hesitating. Eduardo arrived at the agreed spot a few minutes early. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and waited. It wasn't impatience, it was attention. When Lucas appeared, he was walking slower than before. His uneven steps betrayed the pain he tried to hide. He wore the same oversized coat and carried an old backpack slung over one shoulder. "I thought you wouldn't come," Lucas said quietly. "I said I would," Eduardo replied. Lucas shrugged and got into the car without argument. The drive to the hospital passed in silence. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the window, while Eduardo noticed every small movement the way Lucas shifted in his seat. The short breaths when the car hit a bump. When they arrived, Lucas hesitated before opening the door. "If they tell me to leave," he began. "I'll be there," Eduardo said. All the way, Lucas didn't answer, but he stepped out. Inside, the hospital felt overwhelming. Too bright, too loud, too fast. People moved with urgency, pushing stretchers, calling names, staring at screens. Lucas pulled his shoulders inward. At the reception desk, the clerk barely looked up. "Guardian's documents?" she asked automatically. Lucas stepped back at once. Eduardo moved closer to the counter. "I'm the guardian," he said firmly. The clerk finally looked at him, then at you, Lucas, then back at Eduardo. "I need the child's documents," she said. "He doesn't have them," Eduardo replied. The clerk sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from hearing the same story too many times. "Without documents, care is limited, I told you," Lucas muttered, his fingers gripping the straps of his backpack. "Wait," Eduardo said softly, turning toward him. Eduardo explained the situation calmly. He spoke about the pain, the wounds, the risk. He didn't beg. He asked for evaluation. After several tense minutes, a nurse called Lucas's name in the examination room. The doctor was young, but his eyes were tired. He asked to see Lucas's leg. Lucas hesitated. "I'll stay," Eduardo said. Lucas nodded. When the doctor removed the layers of cloth and tape, the room fell silent. The skin was inflamed open places marked by long-standing infection. The doctor exhaled slowly. "This is much worse than it looks," he said. Eduardo felt his stomach drop. "How long have you been using this?" the doctor asked. "Since the accident," Lucas replied quietly. 3 years, the doctor confirmed. Lucas nodded. The doctor stepped back, removing his gloves. "This improvised prosthetic is causing constant injury. The infection could spread." "What does that mean?" Eduardo asked. The doctor looked directly at him. "It means serious risk." Lucas understood by the tone alone. He straightened slightly. "Am I going to die?" he asked. The doctor hesitated. Eduardo answered before anyone else could. "No." The word was firm, even as fear surged inside him. "You're not." The doctor explained the need for tests, antibiotics, possibly surgery. He spoke of urgency. He spoke of time. He also spoke of paperwork. "For any invasive procedure," the doctor said, "we need legal authorization from a guardian." Lucas heard the conversation from the hallway. Sitting on a hard chair, he rocked his good leg back and forth. Authorization. Guardian. Surgery. He had heard these endings before. When Eduardo returned, the chair was empty. Eduardo's heart raced. "Lucas," he called. No answer. He ran through the hallways, past the reception desk, out through the sliding doors. Outside, a cold rain had begun to fall. Eduardo looked around, panic easing, and in that moment, he understood something clearly. This was the first real test, not of money, not of influence, but of staying. The rain intensified quickly, as if it had only been waiting for the right moment. People rushed past with umbrellas and lowered heads while Eduardo crossed the hospital parking lot without noticing the water soaking through his expensive suit. "Lucas," he called out again. No answer. The fear didn't come as panic. It came as weight heavy and tight in his chest, a familiar understanding that Lucas knew exactly how to disappear when he felt threatened. Eduardo moved toward the surrounding streets, scanning beneath awnings, near trash bins, down narrow alleys. He called Lucas's name louder now. Some people stared, others ignored him. Eduardo didn't stop. He couldn't shake the image of Lucas sitting alone in the hallway, listening to words like authorization and guardian, to a boy who had spent his life being left behind. Those words could only mean one thing. It's over. Instinctively, Eduardo headed toward the underpass nearby. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because Lucas had mentioned it before. Maybe because people who run always return to the places where they feel invisible. The roar of traffic echoed above the concrete. Rainwater pooled on the ground, carrying the smell of dampness and neglect. And there he was. Lucas sat with his back against the pillar, knees pulled to his chest, his backpack discarded beside him. The oversized coat clung to his thin frame, soaked and heavy. Eduardo slowed his steps. He didn't want to startle him. "Lucas," he said softly. The boy didn't lift his head. "I knew it," Lucas said, his voice muffled. "There's always a problem." Eduardo sat down on the wet ground a short distance away. He didn't reach out. He didn't rush to explain. "No one said I was leaving," Eduardo said. Lucas let out a short, bitter laugh. "They always say it differently," he replied, "but it's the same." Eduardo took a breath. "I know you heard things inside," he said. "I heard them too." Lucas finally looked up. His eyes were red, a mix of anger and fear. "They want papers," Lucas said. "Signatures. Names. I don't have those, Eduardo Nadad." "I know. So it's over," Lucas said. "It always is." The words landed hard between them. Eduardo moved closer. "It's not over." Lucas shook his head. "You don't understand. They don't let people like me stay." Eduardo felt something tighten inside his chest. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't understand everything you've lived through, but I understand one thing." Lucas looked at him. "I'm not leaving here without you." Rain streaked down Lucas's face, blending with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Everyone says that at first," Lucas said. "Then they get tired." "I've gotten tired of a lot of things," Eduardo replied. "Money, work, pretending everything is fine, but I'm not tired of you." Lucas frowned. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Eduardo said. "I saw you fall over bread. I saw you afraid to eat. I saw you pretending you weren't in pain." Lucas hugged his arms around himself. "I don't want to go to a shelter," he said quietly. "No one stays there." "I don't want to take you to a shelter either," Eduardo replied. Lucas inhaled deeply. "Then where?" Eduardo paused, not because he didn't know, but because he understood the weight of the answer. "First," he said, "we go back to the hospital. You need treatment." Lucas looked away. "And after that, we figure it out together," Eduardo said. Lucas laughed nervously. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one," Eduardo replied. "I won't promise easy. I promise not alone." Silence returned, broken only by the sound of cars passing overhead. "What if you give up?" Lucas asked. Eduardo looked at the rain-soaked concrete, then back at the boy. "Then you can hold me to it," he said. "But I won't." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted. "Not trust, permission." "Okay," Lucas said. "But if it hurts more, I'll leave." Eduardo nodded. "That's fair." Eduardo stood first and held out his hand. Lucas stared at it, hesitated, then took it. This time, with less fear. They walked back to the car together. As Eduardo started the engine, he felt something new settle inside him. Not relief, responsibility. From that moment on, it was no longer about helping a boy. It was about not turning back. As the car pulled away from the underpass, Lucas looked back through the window one last time, then faced forward. And for the first time, he didn't plan an escape. Returning to the hospital felt different this time. Lucas walked beside Eduardo, not behind him. His steps were still uneven, his face tight with pain, but he didn't stop. Eduardo noticed the effort it took and slowed his own pace without saying a word. Inside, the lights felt harsher than before. At the reception desk, the same questions came again. Documents. Authorization. Responsibility, Eduardo answered calmly, but firmly. He made phone calls. Many of them. Lawyers, assistants, people who were not used to hearing uncertainty in his voice. When one of his attorneys finally arrived, the tone changed. "This is complicated," the lawyer said quietly. "You don't know where this could lead." Eduardo looked at Lucas, sitting on a hard plastic chair, clutching his backpack like armor. "I know exactly where it leads," Eduardo replied. The lawyer frowned. There are risks, he insisted. Legal responsibility, media. People will ask questions. Eduardo didn't lower his voice. Let him ask. The paperwork moved slowly, too slowly for Lucas's pain. Doctors administered antibiotics, cleaned wounds that had been ignored for years. Lucas clenched his jaw but didn't scream. Eduardo stayed. Through every procedure, through every pause. At one point, a nurse pulled Eduardo aside. He's scared, she said. But he trusts you. Eduardo nodded, feeling the weight of that sentence settle in his chest. Hours passed. Finally, the doctor returned with a serious expression. We need surgery, he said. Soon, Eduardo didn't hesitate. Do it. The doctor paused. We still need legal clearance. Eduardo inhaled deeply. Then we get it, he said. Lucas overheard part of the conversation. His shoulders tightened. You're going to get tired, he whispered later, when they were alone. Eduardo crouched down in front of him. Not today, he said. Not tomorrow? Lucas looked unconvinced, but he didn't pull away. That night, Eduardo didn't go home. He stayed in the hospital chair, jacket folded under his head. Every time Lucas stirred, Eduardo woke. At dawn, the legal approval came through. The surgery was scheduled. Lucas was wheeled away on a gurney, his small hand gripping Eduardo's finger until the last possible second. Don't leave, Lucas said. I'm right here, Eduardo replied. The doors closed. Eduardo sat alone in the waiting room. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. Not because of money, not because of influence, but because staying sometimes meant waiting. The waiting room was quiet in a way that made time feel heavier. Eduardo sat with his hands clasped, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the closed doors of the operating wing. Every few minutes, a nurse passed by. Every few minutes, he checked the clock, though it seemed not to move. For the first time in years, Eduardo had nothing to manage. No calls to make, no deals to close. Only waiting. As the minutes stretched, memories began to surface soon in Vidi, persistent. He remembered being a boy himself, growing up in a large house filled with silence. Meals served on time, tutors scheduled precisely, everything provided except presents. His parents were always busy, always traveling, always unavailable. Eduardo learned early that achievement earned attention, that success replaced affection, that staying busy meant not feeling lonely. He wondered, sitting there, how many years he had spent running from that truth. Across the room, a mother held her child close, whispering Eduardo watched them and felt something twist inside him. He had never been that person for anyone. Until now, the thought frightened him more than he expected. The doors remained closed. A doctor walked past without stopping. Eduardo stood instinctively, then sat again. He imagined Lucas on the operating table, small, vulnerable, trusting him to be there when it was over. The weight of that trust pressed down harder than any responsibility he had ever taken on. What if he was too late? What if staying wasn't enough? Eduardo rubbed his face with both hands, feeling exhaustion settle into his bones. He realized then that this fear, this helplessness was something Lucas had lived with every day, and Eduardo had only just arrived. Hours passed. Finally, the doors opened. The surgeon stepped out, mask lowered, eyes tired but steady. Eduardo stood immediately. It went well, the doctor said. We were able to remove the infected tissue and stabilize the area. Eduardo's breath left him all at once. He's strong, the doctor continued. Stronger than most adults. Eduardo nodded, unable to speak. You'll be able to see him soon, the surgeon added. He's still asleep. When Eduardo entered the recovery room, the beeping of machines filled the air. Lucas lay still, pale, his chest rising and falling slowly. Eduardo sat beside him and gently wrapped his fingers around Lucas's hand. It was warm. For the first time since they had met, Lucas's hand wasn't cold. Eduardo closed his eyes, not in prayer. In gratitude. He stayed like that for a long time, listening to the rhythm of Lucas's breathing, anchoring himself to the moment. When Lucas finally stirred, his eyelids fluttered open. You stayed, he whispered. Eduardo leaned closer. I told you I would. Lucas's eyes closed again. A faint smile forming before sleep took him once more. Eduardo remained by his side, knowing that whatever came next, there was no doubt anymore. Staying wasn't something he was trying to do. It was who he had become. Recovery did not come quietly. The days after the surgery passed slowly, measured by medication schedules, whispered conversations, and the steady hum of machines. Lucas woke often during the night, disoriented, reaching out before he fully understood where he was. Each time, Eduardo was there. Sometimes sitting in the chair beside the bed, sometimes standing near the window, sometimes asleep with his jacket folded under his head, but always there. The nurses noticed. "He relaxes when you're here," one of them said quietly. "He's been afraid for a long time." Eduardo nodded. He didn't need the explanation. Lucas tested the world carefully now. He watched Eduardo for signs, checking his phone too often, standing up too quickly, glancing at the door. Every small movement carried meaning. One afternoon, while a nurse adjusted an IV line, Lucas spoke without looking up. "You don't have to stay all the time." Eduardo didn't answer right away. "I know," he said finally, "but I want to." Lucas frowned slightly, as if unsure how to respond to that. Later that evening, when the room grew quiet and the lights dimmed, Lucas whispered again, "Are you leaving tonight?" Eduardo moved closer to the bed. "No." Lucas nodded and turned onto his side, pulling the blanket closer. The next morning, Lucas was allowed to sit up. The effort left him pale and breathing hard, but he didn't complain. Eduardo watched every movement, resisting the urge to intervene too quickly. "You can tell me if it hurts," Eduardo said. "It always hurts," Lucas replied. "But it's different now." How Lucas thought before it hurt because nothing was changing. He said, "Now it hurts because something is." Eduardo smiled faintly. As the days passed, doctors explained the next steps: physical therapy, long-term care, and eventually a proper prosthetic. None of it would be easy. None of it would be quick. Eduardo listened carefully. He asked questions, he took notice. He adjusted his life without hesitation. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. The world he once prioritized began to shrink around the edges, and he didn't miss it. One evening, Eduardo stepped out briefly to speak with a doctor. When he returned, Lucas was sitting upright, eyes wide, breathing shallow. "You were gone," Lucas said. "I stepped out," Eduardo replied calmly. "I came back." Lucas stared at him. "That's what people say," he said softly. Eduardo sat down and took his hand. "I won't disappear," he said. "Not like that." Lucas didn't respond, but he didn't pull his hand away either. That night, Lucas fell asleep, holding Eduardo's sleeve. Eduardo didn't move. He understood now that healing wasn't only happening in Lucas's body, it was happening in the spaces where fear used to live. And staying day after day was the medicine neither of them knew they needed. Physical therapy began quietly. No dramatic speeches, no sudden victories, just small rooms, rubber mats, parallel bars, and the steady presence of a therapist who spoke calmly and expected effort without pressure. Lucas hated it at first. The movements hurt. The exercises exposed weakness he had learned to hide. Every attempt reminded him of what his body had lost. Eduardo stayed nearby, never hovering, never leaving. He sat against the wall or stood by the door, watching without interfering, trusting Lucas to find his own rhythm. The first time Lucas tried to stand with support, his arms trembled. His face tightened in concentration. The therapist guided him gently. "Take your time," she said. Lucas nodded, jaw clenched. He lifted himself up. For a second he was upright. Then his leg buckled. He fell. The sound of his body hitting the mat echoed louder than it should have. Lucas didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, breathing hard. "I can't," he said finally. Eduardo didn't rush to correct him. "You can," he replied. "Just not yet." Lucas turned his head toward him. "You don't know that..." Eduardo met his gaze. "I know effort when I see it." The next attempt was worse, and the next... Lucas grew frustrated, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. He slammed his fist against the mat. Everyone thinks this is easy, he snapped. They don't feel it. No, Eduardo said calmly. They don't. The therapist gave Lucas space. Eduardo stayed silent. After a long pause, Lucas pushed himself up again. This time, he stayed upright a little longer. Not long, but longer. Progress came in inches. A step with support. A stumble. A reset. Days turned into weeks. Lucas learned to balance, learned to trust the new sensations, learned that falling didn't mean failing. Eduardo learned something too. He learned how hard it was to stay quiet when someone you care about is struggling, how tempting it is to step in too soon. But Lucas needed space as much as support. One afternoon, during a session, Lucas asked the therapist if Eduardo could step outside for a moment. Eduardo hesitated, but he did. Through the glass, he watched Lucas concentrate, shoulders tense, breathing controlled. Lucas stood, adjusted, took a step, then another. He didn't look back. When he finally sat down, exhausted, he glanced toward the door. Eduardo was still there. Lucas nodded once. That night, as they walked slowly through the hospital corridor, Lucas stopped. I stood today, he said. I saw, Eduardo replied. Lucas hesitated. I didn't fall. Eduardo smiled. You didn't. Lucas looked down at the floor, then back up. I want to try again tomorrow. Eduardo placed a hand on his shoulder. You will. For the first time since they met, Lucas wasn't just surviving. He was building something, step by step. Moving into Eduardo's house felt unreal to Lucas. The rooms were too quiet, too clean, too big. The first night, Lucas slept on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, shoes placed neatly beside him. He woke up at every sound. His body braced, as if expecting someone to tell him it was time to leave. Eduardo noticed, but didn't comment. In the mornings, food was always available. Too much of it. Lucas ate slowly, eyes darting around the kitchen, checking cupboards, memorizing where things were kept. One afternoon, Eduardo found a piece of bread tucked inside the pocket of Lucas's jacket. Lucas froze when he realized, I'm not stealing, he said quickly. Eduardo knelt down in front of him. I know, he said. You don't have to hide food here. Lucas nodded, but that night, Eduardo found another piece of bread hidden under the mattress. Habits like that didn't disappear overnight. Eduardo didn't scold. He didn't lecture. He simply kept the kitchen stocked. Every day, school was harder. Lucas stood at the gate on the first day, watching children run inside with backpacks and laughter. His grip tightened around the straps of his own bag. De usted, he said, Eduardo nada. Some will, he replied, and some won't. Lucas hesitated. What if they ask questions? Eduardo paused. You can answer if you want, he said, or you can tell them it's none of their business. Lucas considered that. Inside, the stares came, the whispers too. Some kids were curious. Some were cruel. Most didn't know what to do. Lucas came home quiet that afternoon. They asked why you picked me, he said, sitting at the kitchen table. Eduardo leaned against the counter. And what did you say? Lucas shrugged. That you didn't pick me. You saw me? Eduardo smiled softly. Dinner that night was awkward but warm. They talked about nothing important: homework, the weather, a movie Eduardo hadn't seen. Slowly, routines formed. Mornings with toast and silence, evenings with homework and questions, nights with the television playing softly in the background. Lucas tested boundaries without realizing it. He stayed up late. He snapped over small things. He waited to see if Eduardo would leave. Eduardo stayed. One night, after a small argument over school, Lucas muttered, You're going to get tired of me. Eduardo didn't raise his voice. I might get tired, he said, but I'm not leaving. Lucas didn't respond. But later, Eduardo found his bedroom door open instead of closed. Trust was growing, quietly, unevenly, but surely. Adolescence didn't arrive gently. It came with slammed doors, lone silences, and questions that had no easy answers. Lucas grew taller, stronger, more independent, and more restless. The anger appeared quietly at first, sharp replies, rolled eyes, impatience over small things. Eduardo recognized it immediately. He had lived it once himself. But knowing didn't make it easier. Lucas started coming home later. He stopped talking about school. He kept his door closed more often than open. One evening, Eduardo waited at the kitchen table long after dinner had gone cold. When Lucas finally walked in, his face hardened as soon as he saw Eduardo sitting there. "You don't have to wait up," Lucas said. "I know," Eduardo replied calmly, "but I wanted to." Lucas dropped his bag by the door. "You always want to," he muttered. Eduardo took a breath. "Where were you?" Lucas shrugged. "Out." "With who?" "Does it matter?" The tension snapped. "You don't get to interrogate me," Lucas said sharply. "You're not my real." He stopped himself. The words hung between them anyway. Eduardo didn't raise his voice. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." Lucas turned away, jaw clenched. "I didn't ask for you," he said. "You just showed up." Eduardo nodded once. "That's true." Lucas spun around, anger flashing. "Then stop acting like you own me." Eduardo stood slowly. "I don't own you," he said. "I worry about you." "That's your problem," Lucas snapped. "Not mine." The silence that followed was thick and painful. Lucas stormed past him and disappeared into his room, the door slamming shut. Eduardo remained standing in the kitchen long after, staring at nothing. That night, Lucas didn't come out for dinner. He didn't say good night. Eduardo slept little. The next day, Lucas didn't come home after school. Hours passed. Eduardo's phone stayed silent. Panic crept in, not loud, not frantic, but steady and cold. He searched the places Lucas might go. The park, the bus stop, the old streets near the underpass. When he finally found him, Lucas was sitting alone on a low wall, staring at the ground. Eduardo approached slowly. "You don't have to follow me," Lucas said without looking up. "I'm not following you," Eduardo replied. "I'm staying." Lucas laughed bitterly. "You always say that." Eduardo sat beside him. "I know," he said, "and I'll keep saying it." Lucas's shoulders shook. "I don't know who I am," he admitted quietly. "I don't know where I belong." Eduardo turned toward him. "You belong wherever you choose to be," he said, "and you don't have to figure it out alone." Lucas swallowed hard. "You're going to leave someday," he said. "Everyone does." Eduardo shook his head. "I might change," he said. "I might fail sometimes, but I'm not walking away." Lucas finally looked at him. "How do you know?" Eduardo answered without hesitation. "Because I already chose." They sat in silence for a long time. That night, Lucas came home. He didn't apologize. Neither did Eduardo. They ate dinner quietly, side by side, and that was enough. Time changed Eduardo quietly. There was no single moment when it became obvious. No dramatic fall or sudden illness. Just small details that appeared one by one, easy to dismiss at first. He forgot where he left his keys, repeated the same story twice in one evening, paused mid-sentence, searching for a word that refused to come. Lucas noticed before anyone else. At first, he didn't say anything. He answered the same questions patiently. He laughed at the repeated jokes as if hearing them for the first time. But the signs grew harder to ignore. One afternoon, Eduardo stood in the living room, staring at a framed photograph on the wall. "Who took this picture?" he asked. Lucas hesitated. "You did," he replied gently. Years ago, Eduardo nodded slowly, as if accepting a fact rather than remembering it. The doctor's office was quiet when the explanation came. The words were careful, progressive, slow. No immediate danger. Lucas listened without interrupting. On the drive home, Eduardo broke the silence. "I don't want to be a burden," he said. Lucas tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You're not," he replied. "You never were." The roles began to shift naturally. Lucas started reminding Eduardo about appointments, setting alarms, writing notes, and placing them in visible spots around the house. Eduardo protested at first. "I'm fine," he insisted. Lucas smiled softly. "I know," he said. This is just in case. Some days were better than others. On GID days, Eduardo was sharp, present, joking, as always. On bad days, he grew quiet, uncertain, sometimes afraid. One evening, Eduardo looked at Lucas with confusion. You look familiar, he said carefully. Do I know you? Lucas felt his chest tighten, but he didn't let it show. Yes, he answered calmly. You do. Eduardo studied his face for a long moment. You stayed, he said suddenly. Lucas nodded. I did. Eduardo smiled, relief washing over him. Good, he said. I was hoping you would. Lucas helped him to bed that night, adjusting the blankets, turning off the light. As he closed the door, he paused. For the first time, Lucas fully understood what Eduardo had given him all those years ago. Not money, not safety, alone, time, presence, choice. And now it was Lucas's turn to give it back. He stayed. The house felt quieter after Eduardo was gone, not empty, just still. Lucas didn't rush to change anything. For weeks, everything remained exactly where it was. The cup on the counter, the book left open on the armchair, the jacket hanging behind the door. It felt wrong to move them. So many mornings, Lucas would sit at the kitchen table and imagine Eduardo across from him, folding the newspaper the same way he always had. On other days, the silence pressed too hard, and Lucas would leave the house early just to breathe. Grief didn't come as tears. It came as absence. On Eduardo's birthday, Lucas returned to the balcony. The city lights glowed softly in the distance, just as they had on countless nights before. He used to like this view, Lucas said quietly, to no one in particular, said it reminded him that nothing really belongs to us. The wind moved gently through the open space. Lucas stayed there for a long time. Months later, a video began circulating online. It showed Lucas kneeling beside a young boy near a trash bin, speaking calmly, offering food. The footage was distant, unpolished, clearly not staged. Someone had filmed it without thinking much of it. The comments came quickly. This made me cry. I needed this today. I want to be this person. Lucas never replied. The story was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be lived. One evening, Lucas walked down a familiar street, the same one where everything had begun years before. The same cracked sidewalk, the same smell of rain and concrete, and there, near a pile of discarded bags, stood a boy, too thin, too careful, watching the world like it might turn on him at any moment. Lucas stopped. The boy noticed and stiffened. What do you want? The boy asked defensively. Lucas lowered himself to the ground so they were at eye level. What's your name? He asked. The boy hesitated. Matthias, he said. Lucas smiled gently. I'm Lucas Matthias, narrowed his eyes. You gonna leave? Lucas didn't answer right away. He remembered the underpass, the hospital hallway, the waiting room, the quiet voice that once said, I'll stay. I'm not in a hurry, Lucas said finally. Matthias studied him for a long moment, then sat down. That night, Lucas called Eduardo's number without thinking. It went to voicemail. He didn't hang up. Something happened again, Lucas said softly. You'd understand. He listened to the silence on the other end, then smiled. I'm staying, he added. Years later, Lucas would often tell people that nothing in his life began with money or luck or miracles. It began with a moment. A man who stopped his car. A boy who was seen. A choice that didn't turn back, because the world doesn't change all at once. It changes when someone decides to pause, to look, and to stay. And as long as someone makes that choice, this story never really ends.